Hello everyone and welcome. It's a post-lunch session. So I was actually advised, that we should start by making all of you stand up and sit down and do that thrice. But I'll probably not do that. Uh, fir- First of all, just excited to have a stellar panel. I think, the folks here are probably as knowledgeable as anyone else, if not more, about the topic, that we are discussing right now. I understand we started with a slight delay, but so I'll not, spend more time on the niceties. We'll go directly to the questions. First up, will request all of you to give your own views on in some sense, the next stage of energy transition that we are doing in this country. I mean, they've achieved quite a bit so far, right? I mean, half of our energy capacity installation, even in some cases, even the usage, it now comes from non-fossil fuel resources. A giant leap that we have taken, especially in the last decade. uh, what's next? What do we need to focus on? What does 2.0 look like from here? Abhishek, we'll start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Sandeep, and thanks for having me here. Energy transition 2.0, if I may call it. 1.0 was all about building scale. Today we have 260 gigawatts renewable assets in the country, targeting 500 gigawatts or 500 plus by 2030. So I think 1.0 was all about building scale, and we did very well. I think people who survived, thrived were the ones who got cheaper capital, build at speed, build scale, and across the spectrum, solar, wind, hybrid, renewable, all other parts of renewable, I think they have done well. 2.0 is all about not owning the asset, not owning the module or a turbine. It is more about system integration. It's about bringing the flexibility. Because if we go through current challenges, it is definitely going to talk about the bottlenecks which we are facing. These bottlenecks, specifically with regard to grid, I think they are enormous, and how we are able to solve it. Now, there are two types of challenges. One is a physical infrastructure challenge, and being an investor, today, we all know that the biggest challenge is the grid, but only 20% of climate capital goes into grid. We are not able to invest in that. Why? Because it's a typical infrastructure asset, doesn't give you private equity kind of returns. It's tough, so it's not able to attract that kind of corporate capital. And then there is a second half of it is the intelligence required to run that grid optimally, to bring that flexibility into the grid, which is the technology backbone behind it. That's where a lot of capital will be going. And I think that's going to be the real transition 2.0. I think there are 2 3 more changes which will happen in this entire energy transition. A lot more focus will be on aggregating the demand. Today we have fixed demand pools. I think the demand will become quite flexible. uh, Everybody focuses on supply. Okay, the supply has to be there. We know that we'll lose lot of tariffs at the peak of the day wherein the solar energy is going wasted. So people say that why don't you tweak the supply? But I think the future will be how do you make your demand more flexible. This can come from data centers, from EV fleets, from a lot of industrial houses who can kind of maneuver their processes here and there. I think irrigation pumps, all this, that flexibility of demand will really bring a lot of optimization to the grid as well. So I think that is going to be another big area. And lastly, the most important area, which will be the backbone of energy transition, will be the storage. I think we're still talking about 2 hours, 4 hours battery storage, but I think 10 years now, maybe 7 years from now, I think I see an anywhere between 8 to 16 hours storage as the technology evolves, and that is going to be the future. And storage need not be looked as just taking care of peak loads, but I think it will come in various revenue streams in terms of making sure that there are a lot of ancillary services which storage can provide. So I think storage is going to play a large role. So this is how energy transition will happen in my assessment from in next 7 to 10 years.
Thanks, Abhishek. Sanjeev, over to you.
Sandeep. Uh, Always good to be back in the campus. So glad to be here. So I think basically the way I look at the energy side is say it's a ever changing sector. I've been seeing it in last 30 years. Essentially, you can go back to the history of how the whole thing has evolved, right from the early stage windmills to the hydro plants to the coal plants, and then we moved into the uh, gas based plants. Last 20-25 years have been more the phase when the renewable energy has really come in. And today we talk renewable energy is uh, is literally like the everybody understands it. It's the flavor of the season from the investor perspective. The society loves it because it's clean. The governments love it because it's something nice to talk about. So I think it's a very interesting time that we are seeing a technology which is clean, which is in the reach of everyone, particularly like the solar energy. You can literally fit it on the roof of every building and people can start generating their own electricity. So it's a very interesting form. But as Abhishek mentioned, we are in a situation where this base technology of solar has become extremely cheap. So the implication of that is that there is a oversupply. So when there is a oversupply of something, then you don't know what to do with that. So literally, like it's all over the place. So if you look at the power exchange prices across the world and in India, you will find suddenly the prices are less than 2 rupees. Now one can say, "Ki, what do I do with the 2 rupee power?" So the question has become whether this 2 rupee power is same as any other electron in the evening or not, because this is coming during the daytime. Now the question has come about not about the availability of electricity, but about the timing of availability of electricity. Now, if you need to move this cheaper power, which can actually meet lots of requirements of the society at large about how you, where people are literally short of the energy requirements, uh, can you really shift this uh, particular source, which is so much abundant, into the timings when it is really required? And that is where the storage technologies, whether it is in the form of the lithium ion batteries or the fuel cell batteries or the sodium batteries, these types of things are really going to come into play. So I think that's the beauty of the human innovation, that essentially the way we have been developing the battery technologies, the pricing of the lithium ion battery, which we are very familiar, everybody carries in their phones and laptops, has come down significantly. But to really make it so cheap, I think the chemistry of these cells have to change. And that is where the transition will happen, because currently the raw material that is required is in control of few countries. If you look at the heavy material, lithium, cobalt, etc., etc., so you will not see that type of the availability of this particular thing across the world as one would like. One has seen in the context of the solar modules. Solar modules are relatively easier to manufacture, and this has really grown in India. We have seen great recovery there. So I think the next phase is going to be finding out where the research can take us. I don't know whether that will happen in India, whether that will happen in the Western countries, but the manufacturing definitely will happen in China. The scale always picks up from there. Uh, so that is something which will be an interesting play. And the availability of electricity and energy generally across the world for society should improve significantly. That is, I think, the way I would like to see it. I don't know what will be the roles of various people in this one.
Thanks, Sanjeev. Vivek, I mean, a couple of points highlighted, right? We are talking of grid, we are talking of battery, so that the sort of smoothing of that energy demand. Are there other things, or will the innovation largely revolve around it?
Firstly, very grateful to iMenchers to invite me here. This is you all are a very early stage backer of our venture, and always very grateful to be here. I mean, I think a lot of very valid points. Most of the points covered. I'll break this down by segment depending on where and who the audience is. I think so. First, if you look at it from a energy 2.0, is going to be different for every constituent in the industry. So take the customer as always. If we should start with him, there used to be a time when there was the maintenance manager who would be in charge of utilities and look at power and ensure कि power supply आ रहा है and backup power hai to DG chal raha hai ya nahi. Whereas now I think there are going to be energy managers. They will have to be sophisticated in understanding each technology of energy supply, marry their corporate strategy to where they want to be. So, for example, if they have a growth business, they should know which states they are going into for energy, which makes sense, and what kind of energy makes sense in those states. They will need to know how to contract with each of the suppliers of these energy. So, a nuclear power supply will be very different than a solar power supplier, and know what are the risks in those contracts and contract with them accordingly. There will be more sophistication in the market where they will have certain exposure to having to buy power from the exchange. Knowing when to do that, how to do that, how to time and price that right is going to be a tough challenge for customers. So largely customers and their energy management has to get sophisticated. There will be energy managers to start off with, which are there in fairly large corporates, but it will become the norm everywhere going forward. So that's the customer side. Think about the government policy making side. I think largely, I mean, look at the air around any of our cities. This December has been terrible. While you talked about some fairly large numbers that the government has achieved in capacity basis, energy basis, even today 70% of our energy is coal. And that can't continue, right? And we really need a compelling, even more compelling policy. I think our policies have been super supportive. If you look at the in the vicinity in which we operate, you will appreciate that India does a fabulous job. So our policies have to continue pushing us towards greater renewables, while and in that greater self-sufficiency in the way we manufacture and supply our components to diversify, say, from China and so on. The policy will have to think much more proactively than they did in storage. Storage seems to have suddenly become the flavor of the day, and it's a late reaction. Let's not ignore that. The fact is that it was there. It was there always. We all know renewables are intermittent. We all know it has to go with storage. How is it that policy took so long to materialize on that front? And so policy will have to get more proactive on that front. The elephant in the room, of course, is the discoms. What is the state of affairs there? Their health is deteriorating year after year from a financial performance standpoint. What kind of privatization are we going to embrace? How is the politics of that going to be embraced? Energy 2.0 is going to be about all of this. And it's going to be about bold decisions that will have to be taken on the privatization front. Otherwise, none of these technology innovations we are referring to will eventually see the light of the day. Policy, as we know in our space, is a key driver for where we want to be. Think developers or suppliers like a couple of us are. We need to innovate. Power was always a very laid back, steady, very thanda industry, right? Matlab, to that extent, 25-year power purchase agreements were the norm. Will that be going forward? Maybe not. Will you be as dynamic? Can you adopt multiple technologies? Can you understand what customers need? Can you have customer service mindset? Because more and more of us are going to get closer and closer to the end consumer rather than the discom who's an intermediary. So the more you get closer to the consumer, the more demands there are going to be, and different demands there are going to be. And how are we going to respond to that is going to be Energy 2.0 driven through from a developer standpoint. The financier community, it's very nice to say, do your financial closure, show me an established commercial technology. But all the discussions here so far have been about new technologies, which means that financiers have to get comfortable. Do they understand storage? Very often megawatt peak, megawatt hour, ye sab terms they are not easy to understand, but you have to understand as a financier. You have to get your head around all of that and understand the risks of those technologies, but be willing to back some of that with an understanding that if we don't do so, we will not be able to fulfill our contractual obligations as suppliers. Think component developers. I think some of the points mentioned, new technologies on materials, new battery technology, new blade technology. We need to think as innovation will come about in all of these. And simply put, 2.0 is going to be very, very much more dynamic and exciting. And for, some of us who've been in the industry for 15 years, it feels like the next 5 is going to, or next 10 is going to be fascinating. So looking forward to that.
Great. Thanks, Vivek. Quick question. I mean, moving from 30% to 70%, where renewable energy is actually contributing to a much higher share. What do you think is the key bottleneck? Is it demand supply matching?
Right. Base load, right? I mean, largely the challenge is what is going to be your base load. And currently, a lot of our base load is catered to by thermal. So, what are those industries? And sorry, I didn't touch upon another important factor, which also becomes important. Those days where base loads were defined by different industries in the past, it's going to be defined by different industries in the future, right? I mean, data centers are now going to be very, very dominant consumers of power, and the way they're going to structure base load is going to be very different than the way we usually used to. So, what is base load going to be driven by is going to be a question, and largely the biggest. There are two factors: from a demand side, base load; from a supply side, technology. Intermittency has to be removed by backing it with certain other technology. So solar has to go with battery, or wind has to go as a wind solar hybrid with battery, and give certain hours of fixed supply, which is what the grid needs, which is what the customer needs. And if we can give that, which is happening all over the world, and there's no reason why we can't, then we should be able to bring our energy share much higher.
But just to add one point, this demand supply, when you compare with thermal to renewables also come up with a very different dimension, which is their ability to give consistent performance across seasons, across day, time of the day, etc. So if you see, we have low seasons where wind is not there. We have summer season for solar and winter season for solar. So I think if you look at the overall grid was always built keeping thermal in mind and outside the cities, and nobody at that point in time kind of observed or actually visualized that we will be building thermal solar parks in desert, right? So now there is a requirement of grid. So when you want to build that kind of grid, etc., and you have to take care of these kind of variations which keeps happening, I think a lot of investments need to be made into newer technologies, and that's where the storage will become the backbone for everything.
Thanks. So how many entrepreneurs do we have in the room? If you could just raise your hands. Okay, that's pretty good. So I think the next question will be on that. Sanjeev, I'll start with you.
Yeah.
I mean, as the industry matures a bit, there are always spaces where startups operate and spaces where incumbents operate. For let's say renewable energy, how does that split look like? What should a startup, for example, that's getting started, maybe bootstrapped, seed funded? I'm not talking someone who has raised millions and millions, but someone who is starting. What should they be focusing on?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be interesting space if you look at because the technology, one is the physical hardware technology part of it, the other is the software part of it. So there is going to be more and more integration or the digitization of the technologies that are being used here. So if you look at the solar, and obviously it's not a new thing that I'm telling you. So if you look at the solar, there are solar panels. You see, they are silently working. You don't know how well they are working. Can you look at a solar plant like a machine and say whether it's rotating at this RPM or whether this is what it is generating, etc., and if is it working at the full efficiency or not? That's where the digitization comes into picture, and therefore what you do is you bring in the technology to really measure at every node of that technology that what is exactly happening, whether it's working at the full speed or not. That is the first part of it. Now the same technology or the similar technology has to be used in something like a battery. So battery is something upcoming. So the energy management system, which is a very critical component, battery management system, which is a critical component for the batteries. These are the important things where one has to find out that how is a battery performing? What should be the rate of charging? What should be the rate of discharge? How is the temperature affecting the life of the battery? So these are the things where younger people and the new companies can bring in the technology angle into the whole thing and do something which is more relevant for the seed funded thing, because this is not something which is like you can't really go and invest like hundreds of millions of dollars into manufacturing the batteries. You have to find out something which is in your sphere of competence or your sphere of influence. This is where I can play the game. So find out that something like that. So these are the things. Similarly, as was pointed out by Vivek also about customer end. So when the customers are looking at how should I consume my energy, so can there be a software which can give him the market information, which can also give him the pricing of different sources and say that at this point you should buy from this source, at this point you buy from here. This is how you should reduce your demand. So those are the types of things which are, I think, at the convergence of the technology as well as on the both sides, like the hardware and the IT technology. That's where some of the younger companies can play an important role.
Thanks, Sanjeev, for that. Uh, are there consumer plays in this? Or not?
Consumer plays, when you say, what does that mean?
I mean, where we're not talking of maybe businesses, but individuals and all more.
In the
on a- is
West,
it-
if you are a home consumer, you have the choice to decide. Oh, I'm sorry. You have a choice to decide what kind of energy you want to consume. You can say, I want only solar power, or I want only wind power, and so on. So consumers have
That's-
the
yeah.
right to choice. The time
But
will
that
come.
will depend quite a bit on the how the policy changes, how the governments decide about it, how the regulators decide about it. So a lot of time we can keep on asking the government should do this or the policy should be like this. However, these are the things beyond control. So normally my own thinking is that you assume that this is the world and the world will continue like this. How do I make my own space in this?
Wonderful, wonderful. Vivek, I'll just come to you. You started over a decade ago, built, on your way to scale and success. If you were starting now, how would you do it differently, or would you do it differently? Have things changed in any way? I mean, just one.
So yeah, absolutely will do it differently. For 15 years that I've done it, I've lost all my hair, so I have to do it differently if I were to do it differently this time. I don't know, several of you may have attended the session in the morning. I thought it was very inspiring. I was sitting with Rahul. I think at the time, is to put that in context, we raised our first check 3 years after we started. And I was here for a year and a half before we got our first commitment from Infuse Ventures. I think the life and time, and at that time, Infuse Ventures was like the only, I think, renewable energy VC fund in India then. I think life today is so much different. I think the large point made about, I think there's a case, and I can see Sanjeev is as battle scarred as I am, but I think this generation, I hope, will be more audacious. I hope they will do a lot of what was said this morning about translating some of very fundamental technology innovations happening in our universities down through to game-changing events across the world, be it in material sciences, be it in deep tech, be it in using artificial intelligence to do everything that we are doing and have a huge team to do. So I think there is a case to think out of the box. There are, I think, investors who will back that journey and story. I, for sure, if I were to do it again, would do it in a far more audacious manner. I think we were, I think as Sanjeev said, always thinking, assuming the policy is what it is, because that overhang on for us was too immense, and at every stage we had to always consider कि अगर भी policy improve भी हुआ वो 2 कदम आगे बढ़ के 1 कदम पीछे आएगा ही. So we had to be very cautious about what we do. It took us from 2010 when we started to 2020 by the time we went to open access. For 10 years we were only on site and distributed, and then we went to open access. So I think because we were worried, what if the policy changes? And we are taking the discoms head on. Will that have a repercussion? I think today entrepreneurs can be more audacious. Investors today are far more supportive of that. So I think that should be the case.
Investors are happy because they probably made more money, so they can afford to be audacious. But I think it's not honestly, it's not like as Vivek pointed out. At least personally for me, I have not as battle scarred. So so I think it's important that you enjoy what you're doing. So believe in what you're doing. and you will find ways. So remain completely open to the ideas that things will change, things will be beyond your control. So energy, the good thing about energy is that it's a large industry, and there is no dearth of capital which wants to invest in this industry. So if you are in an industry which is a basic requirement, which is a basic need of every human being, and there is capital backing it, I think, and if you keep your head over your shoulders, don't do anything crazy, then you will find your way. That's the only thing I can say. I don't think there is a fixed formula here.
Got it. Thanks, Sanjeev. Abhishek, one question from me. It's you're an investor. So there's quite a few startups in the room. One or two bets, even if they're contrarian bets, where you'd want to, where you are eagerly looking to put in money.
Sure. So, but before that, I just want to answer Sanjeev. Investors are just incidental beneficiaries owning minority. Wealth is always made by entrepreneurs. But on your question, I think demand is there, supply is there, policy environment, as they mentioned, is there. I think the future is all about optimizing these 3-4 things, right? And they all are very dynamic in nature. So how do you optimize it? I think probably I would bet today, not today, maybe next 5 years, which may play out till 2035, is focusing on repowering existing defunct solar and wind assets, maybe re-energizing them using the current or the newer technologies which is coming in. And I think that can be a large market. That will be a contrarian bet which people are not talking about. I mean, we have to learn a lot of lessons from China. I go to China 4-5 times a year, and every time I go, I always learn something new and come. As a country, as a nation, while policy environment has been favorable, but I think we have not put enough dollars in R&D. We are talking about material sciences, we are talking about multiple other things. We've always borrowed technology from the world. To give you an example, let's look at solar panels. Polycrystalline technology, monocrystalline, monoperc, TOPCon. Now we're talking about HJT, we'll talk about IBC, tandem, perovskite. How much money has been spent in India to develop these kind of technologies on their own? I think hardly few, that too in recent past, some of the IITs have raised their hand and says that, okay, we will put some money behind it. Same thing with wind. We have always borrowed technology. So I think for the future, we need to invest and develop native technologies. And as Sanjeev rightly said, technology is something which will drive differentiation within the startup communities, which will get funded and become scalable. So that's where I would bet on.
Yeah, thanks.